Hi, today we're going to talk about motivation part 1. We're going to start out with the keys to motivation and some research in this area. We'll focus then on flow, arousal levels for individual athletes, individual sports, and then we'll talk about successful ways for you to create a motivational plan of attack for your athletes in your program. As I do the video here, the lecture, I'm going to go somewhat fast. Don't try to write everything down. Just pick out one key point and then go back to the PowerPoint lecture, and you can find details for referencing and so forth and expanding. So first off, how and why are people motivated? They're motivated to fulfill their needs. If you understand then what some of your athletes' unique needs are, this is getting to know them is important at the beginning. You're going to do a better job of providing those opportunities and motivating them. Sports psychologists specifically now have decided that the two most important needs of athletes are, number one, to have fun, and then number two, feeling worthy. Okay, so this is done with being confident, successful, but in exciting and enjoyable things. So this gets back to the importance of designing your reward system for your program. If you think about these two key components, then maybe you start with two simple goals to fulfill those needs and those types, and then look at ways you can achieve that that's specific to your program and your athletes. Some of the key things about having the ability to motivate as a coach is you have to know where your students and your athletes are in their readiness. They have to be willing and wanting to learn. So probably one of the first things you have to do is make sure they want to learn and they want to become better. They want to improve. Once you have that situation, then there's some questions you want to ask yourself. Why are some highly motivated and some aren't? And what can you do to make the best they can be? So pause the video here. This is kind of a funny look on classic football movie halftime speech. There is some language in there, so if that offends you, don't watch. But what it does is it gives you a genuine, transparent realism view, but it also shows you how not to give a motivational speech. It doesn't have to be that way. The second part about this is legally, if you're dealing outside of a professional team or a high-level college organization, this legally is probably not appropriate either. Again, the question you always want to ask yourself, if you cannot say okay right away, then it's maybe not okay at all. There's no gray area here. Remember, your standard of practice must meet your standard of care. So it's okay to have fun. I know some of these things are very real, but that doesn't mean it's appropriate. Our culture and world's changing. We need to change with that. So when we get into flow, we're talking about experiences where you're totally immersed in the activity. I'm guessing most of you have experienced this. It's where both mentally and physically you're just in this enjoyable experience of the game, of the sport. It can happen in practice, it can happen in competition. A lot of times athletes will just say, the game got really slow for me, slowed down, and you'll actually can zone out, whether it's the crowd, outside noise and everything. Again, it's kind of looking at finding that optimal arousal level. So again, it's really rewarding internally, intrinsically for you as an athlete if you haven't experienced. Another way to look at this is real simple, is to acquire peak performance. We need to find that happy balance or medium. If you're too high, you can drop off and have a negative arousal. If you're too low, you'll never get there then either. So how to coach flow? How do you create that for your athletes? The first thing you have to do is you make sure you match the challenge of the task to the ability of the athletes. And what that means is it's the legal duty where we need the duty to match the athletes. It's as simple as making sure physically we're matched up with similar body types that we can have a competitive chance against, or simply the skill levels then also. Another way to think about it is the way we learned on the playground. You naturally as a kid gravitated to playground equipment, games, groups that would allow you to have challenges, but at the same time have some success. It's kind of the natural learning environment. Some ways to create flow then as a coach in your practice. You want to keep them stimulating, you want to keep them moving, but you want to make those fun, and the real simple way to do that is using the games approach where you create small-sided games within the drills. Soccer does a great job of this, so it's an example of learning from other sports and being able to apply them to your sport instead of just doing what's traditionally done. Let your athletes design some of the drills or be part of it. Talk about changes or things you can tweak to make it better, make it have a better flow, and make it more enjoyable. I really think this is one of the most important things, is keeping everyone active. When I do consultant work with programs, and football is famous for this, you'll have a line of 20 people and 1 or 2 people are active. You need to try to find ways to keep the constant flow going if you want to create that also. Avoid constant instruction. I remember I had a time when I was coaching in college young, we were doing a 7-on-7 passing drill, which is quite common, where you're just doing the skilled people passing against the skilled defensive players. It's a very fun drill, but I was giving feedback all the time so that I absolutely stopped any flow. And I had one of our captains come up to me and go, hey, maybe let us just kind of go through a period and have some flow without all the feedback. So I actually went a week of giving no feedback until the session was done and let the athletes do it. And it was a great experience not only for me as a leader and as a coach and as a teacher, but it really engaged and empowered the athletes to be part of the process. And they had fun because they had flow when they were doing it. That gets in the last thing then, don't constantly evaluate, especially during a contest. So one of the things I learned from that 7-on-7 drill experience was to let players go play during competitions in particular. At this time, I'd like you to pause the video lecture and do this workshop. It's kind of the first steps in designing your reward system, which is going to be a required part of one of your written assignments. You want to develop what's called a motivational plan of attack. It just doesn't happen naturally. You have to be proactive and come up with a curriculum or structure. So a couple things to do this is think about where your team is in the different parts. I would focus on one. You're going to need to do this for your portfolio all the way through, and that is preseason, in-season, postseason, or off-season play. Again, then once you start to pick one period of the year or your team's readiness, then you want to start to give specific examples and be creative in the ways you're going to create flow or motivate your athletes. Remember, go back to the 2 types, 2 research components, and that's having fun and a feeling of worth. Start with those, and then don't just pull from your past experiences. Look at other sports, like I mentioned, with soccer, with small-sided games, or different organizations, ideas you get, so that you kind of fill up a shopping cart and you can use this as a way to try things. Not everything's going to work, but I would encourage you to try different techniques and methods. So go ahead and do the workshop here. Now that we've done the workshop, we want to go back to how do you create those 2 key components. First off, a need for feeling worthy. It really depends on their ability to achieve. People and kids as young as 5 start to understand this. I've currently got a 6 and a 4-year-old daughters, and their whole self-worth is on them getting positive reinforcement and feedback. With respect to sports, it does become winning and losing, but this is where we talked about, and we'll talk about continually, of focusing on the process versus focusing on the end product, the score with that. So again, winning and losing, or failure and success, is kind of a state of mind, and we'll get into that a little bit. Again, thinking about how people avoid or achieve success and failure. So how do different people think and feel? Successful individuals kind of think in this way. They like to blame failures on insufficient effort of themselves, and that they want to continue to challenge themselves to succeed. They just simply need to try harder, so more effort. Therefore, failure increases their motivation. Again, that gets back to, if the definition of success is striving for excellence, then you start to learn these type of athletes or these type of people enjoy the struggle, makes them better. They know it's going to make them better. It's going to make them stronger. Unsuccessful individuals are full of self-doubts, though, and anxiety. And they attribute the failures to the lack of their ability, or just their lack of success, or they're weak, or they're incompetent to their opponents. So again, they start to blame themselves for their failures, but they also don't take any credit or little credit for successes. And this gets into this feeling of you're powerless to change things. So, how can we create some successful thinking? You think, focus on the process, where we're focusing on learning and improving. Don't make it performance-based all the time. When you get into your evaluations, if we're simply doing the fastest times and we're giving all the positive feedback for that, we're creating failure in creating motivation for individual athletes. Think of doing a pre-test and a post-test to see about performance based on their effort in working towards that goal. Again, you want to match the challenge of the task to the ability of the athletes, and then setting realistic goals, both personal with your team at the beginning of the year. You want to use extrinsic rewards to create intrinsic or internal motivation. For example, I was with a program at one time, football program, where they used the helmet stickers, if you've seen those before. I thought they were silly. I'd never been around that. And then after experiencing that with a program, those extrinsic rewards were a great internal motivator, and I used it throughout the rest of my career. Again, success isn't necessarily winning or losing. You want to think about it in terms of improvement one more time. And then understand and recognize the limitations of your athletes, so you set them up for success versus setting them up for failure. So, motivation with anxiety. And remember, balance is kind of the key. If we go back to our bell, if you're over-aroused or under-aroused, you're not going to be able to maximize your performance there. Also understand that higher precision sports skills require fine motor control, so then they're best with lower levels of arousal. A good example would be golfing and putting. Then we get into large muscle movement skills that are better for higher levels of arousal. So this is obviously why a football lineman, offensive and defensive lineman, being highly aroused actually improves their performance quite often. So, motivation wrap-up. Understand your athletes' individual arousal levels, and then what your sport's optimal level would be. Each sport's a little unique. Secondly, help them focus on achieving personal goals within a team mindset. It's all about getting better, making improvements, but not feeling the pressure of being anxious and that fear of failure. We don't want to create that. Again, focus on the process, I would versus the score. Practice to me has always been fun, and because it's a chance to improve and get better. Encourage your athletes to compete with the same intensity, desire, fun, and effort, regardless of what a score would be, what the challenge would be, what the practice or game component would be. Last, and finish up here, when you're done, go back and click on this video, and now it's kind of a funny take on some positive motivational talks. Again, from movies, not real, but again, gives a good example from the first video you watched, and hopefully a fun finish to the keys to motivation and creating successful motivation for your program and your athletes. Thanks.